Welcome to the first February solo show, and it's also the first February hoodie morning on the farm. We woke up to 1.2 degrees. This is supposed to be the hottest month of the year. So there we go. That's the update from down south, right? And speaking of February and speaking of shows, before we begin, I'm traveling for a couple of weeks starting from next week. So we might switch up the schedule of having guest solo show, and we might do two guests in a row. Not sure yet, but it might be a pleasant surprise over the next couple of weeks. So this show is about where to intervene, which is something I have been, I guess, kind of interested in my whole life, but certainly the last 3 years or so would be. I think a lot of people are, but the sort of metaphysics of intervention, I think, has shifted in the 21st century, and in a good way. And I write a lot about that in Ani.Mystic, which will come up. So I want to dive into that through the Islamic or the Muslim story of Moses and Khidr. Sorry, I've got to close, if you're listening to this on the audio, I've got to close me some tabs. All right. The Islamic story of Moses and Khidr, and that's spelled like Khidr, and I'm going to try and say Khidr because that's closer. And in particular, I'm going to be talking about it through the lens of Marie-Louise von France. Let me put that, her essay in Man and His Symbols in theory by C.G. Jung. I read this in the jungle last year, and it wasn't the right. I'm not good at jungle reading. First time around, I picked some Neoplatonic stuff because my thinking was I always read animist stuff. So when I'm in the jungle, I'm going to do the reverse and see what happens. Like, it's almost like you don't need to read animist stuff in the middle of the Amazon. That didn't work. And this time, I did actually read William James' Varieties of Religious Experience, and that was good because he, in fact, went to the Amazon during his life. So there was kind of like part of that DNA. Anyway, this isn't very good. This is the last book, in theory, authored by Jung, but I hadn't read it before. I'd read the essay, the big essay at the beginning that Jung actually wrote, and that's good. Towards the end of his life, that's a sort of final summation of his thought and philosophy for laymen, which is the kind of idea behind this book. And then the rest of it is his lieutenants. Marie-Louise von France is the chief, or was the chief among them. So that's like the second best essay, but it's not Jung. Two, it's not very good. However, there's not a lot to do when you're in Dieta, so I got through it. Okay. And yes, so we're going to be talking about the story of Moses and Khidr, and as is my way these days, I have a few slides to share. I think I want to do picture-in-picture this time. There we go. All right, so we're going to call this one Even the Very Wise Cannot See All Ends, because, you know, if you saw the thumbnail, you know what that's about. And we will, in fact, touch on that because I read the Silmarillion, which I mentioned to John Michael Greer, as a way of sort of meaning-making and navigating, or reread, obviously, but not for 20 years had I touched that book, at the end of last year. And then I bought The Fall of Numenor in New Zealand, which shamefully I haven't finished. And I've almost finished, but I've had that for a few months. It's excellent. It's actually really good. It's a really pleasant book to read in the sense of as an object. Anyway, so Even the Very Wise Cannot See All Ends. Yeah, as I said, this is about where to intervene. And this is Marie-Louise von France's version. Not that she's riffing on it, but I just want to be clear in case we have any Islamic scholars amongst the listenership. And stranger things have happened. We actually do. I could think of two. So, or scholars of Islam is a better way, and Islamic philosophy is a better way of thinking about it. So apologies for people who are offended by my plainly terrible pronunciation of Khidr, but I'm going to give it my best. So that's what we're going to talk about. This is about where to intervene and the metaphysics and philosophy of it. So who was Al-Khidr? Now, Khidr is green. And apparently and this is thanks to a brief little internet research, he was called green because whatever land he would visit or move through would flourish. So that's where it came from, right? And he's one of these beings, and this is a very kind of he's a very Jacques Vallée being in the same way the so-called angel that Jacob wrestled with is. Angel was only sort of appended to whatever that being was much, much later. It's this dark, mysterious figure that won't let him cross the river. It's this just sort of high, strange being. And Khidr, so Marie-Louise von France calls him an angel or a green angel. But actually, in as far as I can tell, again, I'm not the Islamic scholar, he is either, according to mystic Islam, he's a wali, which is a kind of saint, and one who is still living now. So that kind of like that wandering Jesus sort of idea. This is a being who is still on earth today and kind of visits and mysteriously visits, but visits with various Muslim holy people and so on. Outside of mystic Islam, the sort of going consensus is he's a Nabi, which is a prophet sent to another nation. And the reasoning, the sort of logic behind that I quite like, which is, so Moses goes to travel with Khidr and learn from him. And so you have that kind of the Islamic hierarchy of like, well, Moses is like one of the main prophets. Who would he possibly be learning from? And you sort of, I find the logic in that fairly sound, right? And so they settle on, well, Khidr must have been a prophet from another land, because prophets don't know everything and they can certainly learn from each other. But as you sort of, when we move through the story, you'll see that there's Jacques Vallée kind of weird green being angel thing has a lot more resonance for me. Again, not being a Muslim, so that's how we're looking at it from the outside. Because it's in a Jungian book, so we're going to look at two ways this works, right? And it's sort of what to do with dark moments. This is another way. The show also could have been called that. How do we process horror? What to do with dark moments, right? And so von France, writing about encountering, she writes about encountering dark or potent figures in dreams. That's the context in which she brings up the story of Moses and Khidr, but we'll sort of get to her conclusion about that later on. And again, like this, I think this sort of stuff applies. She's talking about dreams here, and I'm about to read it off, but it applies to encountering horror in the inner or the outer, right? And so she writes, when Jung called one aspect of the unconscious personality the shadow, he was referring to a relatively well-defined factor. But sometimes everything that is unknown to the ego is mixed up with the shadow, including even the most valuable and highest forces. If the shadow figure contains valuable vital forces, they ought to be assimilated into actual experience and not repressed. It is up to the ego to give up its pride and priggishness and to live out something that seems to be dark, but actually may not be. So there's a move towards humility in front of horror, even here, that happens on the inner with the right kind of shadow beings, you know, and that will depend on what the dream is. Some of them might just be stuff that needs to be seen, but as she's kind of saying there, sometimes everything that is unknown to the ego is mixed up with the shadow. So if we wish to grow and explore new things, that requires some kind of engagement and coming to terms in the Jungian sense with horror. All right, so the story, Moses seeks out this being, Khidr, to be taught by him. And Khidr agrees on one condition, which is not to react or question to any of Khidr's actions while they're together, which is a guru statement that has not aged well. There's a couple of moments in the story where it's sort of, well, that's a 21st century red flag, that's for sure. But it's obviously not. This is one of those hyperdimensional stories that's always true rather than a factual reporting of something going on, right? So they first come to in the story, they first come to a fishing village, or at least a hut of a family of fishing folk. And Khidr scuttles the boat by the dock, and preventing this especially poor family from feeding themselves or making any money. So that's what this great holy being does, is his sort of first encounter on his travels with Moses. So that's where he goes. In the next town they come to, Khidr randomly kills a handsome young man right in front of Moses. And just like at the village, Moses says nothing. Pretty wild. Okay, and so the next part of the story, they come to a town of unbelievers, and the sort of fortification wall has fallen down. And so Khidr raises it back up. And for whatever reason, this instance of home improvement is the last straw for Moses. If it were me, it might have been murdering the kid. But for Moses, it was, okay. You've just refortified a town of unbelievers. What are you doing, you freak, you monster? And so he can no longer contain his indignation, and he expresses it. And Khidr is, okay, well, we're through. And he leaves. And before he leaves, he explains his actions. Well, Einstein, by scuttling the boat, he actually saved it because pirates were on the way to steal it. And as it is being scuttled, it is salvageable, and so they will salvage it. The handsome young man was on his way to commit a crime, and by killing him, he saved his pious parents from infamy. That one still doesn't work. It has to be said. If we were going to write this again, it would be the young man was going to kill 5 people or whatever. But again, this is a hyperdimensionally true story rather than... And what we're talking about in this episode is indeed about morality and the morality of intervening, and whether such things can shift, and we're kind of looking at what to do and how to do in this moment, right? So that would have been the one for me rather than the wall, but different times. And finally, by restoring the wall, 2 pious young men were saved from ruin because their treasure was buried underneath it. All right. we get what this is about. It doesn't age. It's not a contemporary story. It's a hyperdimensionally always true story. But I like this. I like this because, and you can kind of understand why different branches of Islamic thought are like, well, what the fuck was Khidr? Because that's strange, and it is strange. That's the point. It's strange, and here's what von Franz writes. Looking at the story naively, one might assume that Khidr is the lawless, capricious, evil shadow of pious, law-abiding Moses. But this is not the case. Khidr is much more the personification of some secret creative actions of the Godhead. And I remember years ago, there was when Jordan Peterson was doing his Bible tour, and because again, especially if you're watching YouTube shorts, maybe it's just, I don't think it is, because everyone I've spoken to who tries to watch YouTube shorts gets the same Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson clips. But fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, I actually like. And people kind of dismiss that as like, well, you shouldn't be, what are you, afraid of the thunder being? It's like, no. It's the beginning of wisdom, because you're stepping into an understanding like this, which is even the very wise cannot see all ends, and stuff that goes on that's horrible is these, as Marie-Louise von Franz says here, the secret creative actions of the Godhead. So what was Khidr? And you see why it works, I think, you can do a Valean analysis on it. First of all, he's a green being that is maybe not all-knowing, but pretty well-knowing, doing all these strange and mysterious tasks. There's a Fortean read to it, which makes it secret creative actions of the Godhead. And you can kind of vice versa that as well and say, well, are Fortean beings, not all of them, but are there types of Fortean or high strange beings that do the same thing? Are they on some sort of, not necessarily mission from God, but are they intervening because they experience time in the future different to us? So I really like this story. I really like that it works, obviously, on an internal basis, on an inner basis is a better way of saying that, like in a Jungian sense. But I also like it, I also like sitting with it as, well, what the hell was that? In the same way, Jacob wrestling with the angel. What the hell was that? What's going on there? I think that's really, yeah, powerful stuff. Anyway, moving on to sort of widening that out. So it's about, this is simplified. Well, it's not, yeah, it is simplified. It is, and there's certainly more nuance to it, but I'm going to describe it this way, which is, it's sort of about seeing the good in the bad, but not, oh, well, I guess that tragedy was for the best. That's what I mean by lacking nuance. I certainly don't mean that. There is, and inevitably, speaking of the things that I've read recently, which is where the Tolkien stuff has come up the last couple of solo shows, this time around reading the Silmarillion, I am really sitting with a moment in the Ainulindale, which is the first book of the Silmarillion, where Ilúvatar, who's the creator god in this system, says to Morgoth, so during the creation where the Valar and Ilúvatar are basically musicking the cosmos, I guess, because the physical world hadn't been there, musicking creation into being. And Morgoth, who's like the Satan in it, introduces his discordant note, and they get on this and so Ilúvatar plays stronger, and so Morgoth plays stronger, and so on. And then there comes this point where Ilúvatar says to Morgoth, and thou Melkor, which is his name at the time. Again, yeah, most people listening to this or watching this are aware of these figures, but yeah, anyway. At the time, Morgoth was called Melkor. And thou, Melkor, shalt see that no theme may be played that hath not its uttermost in me, nor can any alter the music in my despite. For he that attempteth this shall prove but mine instrument in the devising of things more wonderful, which he himself hath not imagined. So this is a quote-unquote solve for why there is evil in a fundamentally benign universe, which is Melkor jealous of the creative power. This is where we're talking about how Tolkien's kind of Gnostish. Jealous of the creative power, seeks to do the same thing and even seeks to better it. But even doing that and introducing evil to the world, as Ilúvatar says there, like you couldn't change this if I didn't want to, and you couldn't grok why this has been allowed to happen. And you might think that this is your doing. You might think that you are, wreaking evil upon the cosmos and operating solely from your will. But your actions will lead to things yet more wonderful, which you cannot possibly imagine. And that's essentially the why of what's going on here. I really like that. It's sort of, it's a nice chaser to the Moses and Khidr shot, which is, because if you come back to it, so when Khidr leaves, because the what we do with Marie-Louise von Franz, what she's talking about there is obviously a Jungian interpretation, and we're going with, like, I guess a magical or philosophical interpretation. In an Islamic context, it's the sort of prosaic lesson, I guess, is do what the boss says. It's like submit to authority, religious authority. I don't, not in a crass way, but again, that's not a thing that I think doesn't necessarily age that well. But it's the lesson here is like, and see, you should always do exactly what your guru says because he knows better than you, and look what happens if you don't. There will always be reasons for a holy man's actions, and so you should. So there's the sort of, as with any holy text, there's the, let's call it the outer interpretation, which is that. But I think if you sat with it for long enough, it would be like, no, this is more about God, God's actions in a world. Like, why is there evil in the world? That's kind of more about. So there's that secondary level, which is there, I think, when you sit with what Tolkien writes in the Silmarillion about Melkor and Ilúvatar. And especially one of the ways I've been sitting with this, one of the ways to understand why he thought the Lord of the Rings was so small and the Silmarillion was so big, is that the Lord of the Rings is a play out of, in the physical world, of a lot of the stuff that happened in the Silmarillion, which you could effectively say in like the metaphysical or mythical world, which we'll get to on the next slide. Yes, but not quite to. So it's sort of a question when you look at, okay, so if the existence of calamity and evil in the world is part of a process that you cannot begin to comprehend, what is your position with regards to it? How do you position yourselves against evil? Because it's that weird thing, are you stopping something that will lead to more good, and thus are you reducing the total amount of good in the universe? Or in the same way, Melkor's evil actions you can't outthink the creator in that sense of like, okay, well, this evil might lead to good, but will it lead to good if I don't intervene? Or is my intervening part of how it leads to good because it generates more evil? And so you're sort of stuck, and this is the whole point. You need a way to position yourselves in and around and with calamity, I guess, rather than evil, without omniscience, without, oh, I know exactly what should happen right now. I know exactly what every motherfucker should do. And I'm going to destroy the world, making sure they can. You see, that's the thing. That's literally, this is where Tolkien gets quite Gnostic. That is that demiurgic sin. That's what Sauron did. It's like Morgoth wanted to create an evil world. Sauron wanted to run it, like perfection. It's like, I can run this better. So it's like, I know what everyone should do. And that's the trouble with intervening. That's the trouble with any kind of intervening is, oh, you know what everyone should do, huh? And that's the sort of Moses and Khidr medicine. And this is why I've been very interested. And for years, Bayo Kamalafe has been on the show. I've done some courses with him. He's in the book. And he has this idea of post-activism, which is obviously very inspired by the kind of Nigerian thought that he spent a lot of time with, is what if the way we respond to the crisis is part of the crisis? And that's exactly it. It's that I know what everyone should do intervention stuff. And that's, okay, cool. You can look back at the Moses and Khidr story and be, so what if this looks like a crisis? Scuttling the boat, it is, but it's not. This is why I like how Bayo Kamalafe says that. A scuttled boat for a very poor family is a crisis. But what if how we respond to it is part of it? It's, well, how do we do intervening? How do we do? On a quote unquote environmental sense, on an anti-war sense. Well, actually, anti-war is different to, and this will come up again, but yeah, a lot of people a year ago once again got hoodwinked. You see fewer Ukrainian flags in people's Twitter handles. They'll fall for the next thing because they fell for the last two. But that's a really good example a year later of like, okay, well, 100,000 or more people are unnecessarily dead, millions are displaced. And as I said at the time, the more energy you put towards this leads to World War III, which is what we're on the brink of in the next couple of years. So what if the way we respond to the crisis, in that case, is part of the crisis? Is a perfect example. Especially a year later, it turns out that Johnson and Biden repeatedly preventing negotiation and just sending more weapons to kill basically more Ukrainians. So, funneling money and guns to literal Nazis and preventing anyone from sitting down at the negotiation table, which if you're anti-war, is a nightmare. That's a nightmare. These people should not have died. But again, Moses and Khidr. So what if the way we respond to the crisis is part of the crisis? And one of the ways why this is in Ani.Mystic, amongst other things being good advice, is this is a way of decentering the human. And again, this is what I was saying before, how we come back to Gandalf and the Lord of the Rings, and the Lord of the Rings being a play out of Silmarillion medicine. So Gandalf echoes Iluvatar to Frodo that there are forces beyond the will of evil in this world. And it's that, and he says even the very wise cannot see all ends. That's saying that decenter the hobbit, decenter the human. Other stuff is going on in the universe that you cannot comprehend. So what do you do? literally Gandalf is answering the post-activist question. And that is like not so much what can I do. What can I do relies on a level of knowledge we probably don't have. But where can I do something must come from a inner knowledge that you probably do have, right? And in Gandalf's case, well, what he says, obviously famously, is all we have to do is decide what to do with the time allotted to us. That's a wizardier way of not what can I do, but where can I do something. And the crucial thing is this isn't about non-intervention. I mean, Tolkien fought in the war, and he would say that a lot. Like, this isn't necessarily, he doesn't like war, but it's not an anti-war book. And there's also a difference between intervention and war. But for instance, destroying the ring is an intervention. But Tolkien makes it clear that this, when you say all we have to do is decide what to do with the time allotted to us, is not about not standing up to or fighting against evil. It's to do so with the awareness that the universe is bigger and filled with beings that aren't, well, the majority of which aren't human, and that other stuff is going on. And so that's the kind of key to not what can I do, but where can I do something, right? And this is, I think, the kind of magical medicine. And so that leaves us with where to intervene. All well and good. If it's not what can I do, but where can I do something, and what if the way we respond to the crisis is part of the crisis? Where to intervene? And I say this every time, which is, well, first of all, at the level of the field, but even that can be destructive. And this is what I was saying last year at around this time, 11 months ago. Do not contribute to the field of war, ever. That's a moral universal, as far as I can tell. Do not contribute to the field of war, at least for people like us. I don't know. And I look at the people who fell for that Western war propaganda over the past year. And I just wonder what, it's just, again, the medicine in that for me is what Iluvatar says to Morgoth, which is like, look, you think you're being bad, but this is part of my wider song of creation. So anyway, first of all, at the level of the field, but that itself doesn't solve it, because you can do evil things, I guess. This word is losing its semantic value in this presentation. You can do evil things at the level of the field. You can contribute to fields that aren't for the greater or wider good, I suppose. And you can decenter the human. And what do I mean by that in this case is to call in assistance for a calamitous situation. But call in assistance, because this is the bit where I think people tripped up a year ago. They're calling in victory. So they're calling in successful death dealing instead of peace. This one is like simple to me. But call in those forces in the world beyond the will of evil. That's one of the ways to operate at the level of the field. And this comes down to the morality, and this is kind of the key or the kicker to the presentation, which is, if you don't know where to intervene, then choose the most moral place. And the word morality is fraught. It probably shouldn't be. I am using it in the sense of a cosmos that is majority non-human, which is, at any time you can look inside and go, what is going to make the world better rather than worse in this situation, in this moment? What's going to make it better? And if you look at, death dealing and violence and war, and if that seems to me open and fucking shut, drop in and go, oh no, I actually think what will make this situation better is more death and war. So, well, you don't need to be in full possession of the facts, because certainly the people who did that weren't, and frankly, some of them were very obvious. But even without that, but you can know and say, okay, well, what do I actually want? Like, what are the people who are contributing to the increase at the level of the field of death and war and violence? What do, giving them the benefit of the doubt, they actually want? Ultimately, they want peace to break out. Okay, that's a better target, don't you think? That's a better thing to call in, because again, as we all kind of know, if you do magic, it is a function of the universe that you have to ask. You have to call in and ask. And the best framework for understanding that, I think, inevitably, is the animist one. Because if you look elsewhere, you'll get like, oh, it's like the rules of the universe. You know, God tells the angels that they can't intervene unless we ask. All this kind of, well, that seems like a stupidly made creation. What I think it is more is relation. So to ask is a form of relating. So you and we only exist in relation. So it's like that the universe literally doesn't work until you ask. To come into relation with something, asking is a form of that. So that's one of the things you can do. Well, you can always do and should be doing. But also, it works on the micro when you understand that you're operating, you know, when they're in a much bigger game, you have that potential and opportunity and invitation to just make the world better where you are. And that's this calling in and so on. But again, in any moment, and this is metaphysically significant, if you drop in, if you just quiet and drop down to that level of the heart, you know damn well what you could do in that moment. Ask. Drop down and ask what you can do in that moment. And that question being like, what is going to make the world better rather than worse in this situation? If you're in an argument, if something has got, flights have been cancelled, and say, well, I have the opportunity to yell at this woman whose fault it definitely isn't, or not. And I don't mean just not, but like, okay, what can I do to make the universe better at this point? And that's the where can I do something, not what can I do, because you can't uncancel your flight. But you can sort of make this woman feel better about, I'm sorry, you're going to have about 100 angry people yelling at you in a moment. I'm really sorry that's about to happen, you know? So this is the thinking that got me onto the Moses and Khidr story. And it was probably the part of this book that really stuck with me in the jungle. And again, reading that on ayahuasca is, well, not on ayahuasca, but on the between days when you still kind of have it in the system. And by then I've told the story a few times, but it's relevant. I'd been about a month into drinking ayahuasca, and there'd been a cumulative effect where I could feel the field all around me. It obviously helps to be surrounded by so much life, but I could feel the field all around me. And when you come up on ayahuasca, and I actually just did this video for the foundations. When you come up on ayahuasca, it's almost like the air or the cosmos around you gets bigger, even though it's stayed the same shape or the same volume. So you get sort of smaller as everything kind of gets bigger, and that's that kind of coming to awareness of the spirit world or the field all around you. And not just could I feel that all around me, but I was aware that it was made of intentions and interfaced with intention, so that you can, there is probably not just humans, but this is my experience as a human, you can, with intention, shift the field, not just locally, but because it's the field everywhere. And I could feel that. And obviously the lesson there is like, ayahuasca doesn't help you do that. You are always doing that. It's that ayahuasca can allow you to feel and experience it. So the Moses and Khidr story kind of hit at a time where I was feeling the field as, I was feeling the impact of thoughts and intentions on the field. And I'm like, wow, this is one of those stories that, like all good kind of hyperdimensional stories, works on a bunch of really powerful levels. And I've been waiting to share it. I've been waiting to share the even the very wise cannot see all ends. And even that can kind of be a mantra. When you think you know what to do or where to intervene, you can quote a line from a New Line Cinema production, and it's a good way of pulling yourself up and going, hang on, all right, I will never know the full story of what's going on here by definition. So where can I do something? And that's sort of food for thought. Anyway, that's this week's solo show if you're listening on the audio version. If you're in the chat, which again, now that I'm back on the farm, I can watch the chat with some kind of jealousy. And I will stay in the chat and talk to you guys there if you want to hang about. But otherwise, thank you very much once again for tuning in live, and thank you very much for listening. Like I said, there will be, oh yeah, the foundation started this week. Maybe I should have opened with that. Please join if you haven't. It's really fun. It's exhausting, but it's fun. And yeah, I'm traveling. And if you are in the Wellington area on February the 11th, so 2 Saturdays hence, there are drinks. Please RSVP at higher side meetups, because we've booked an area. I think we've booked a big enough space because there's only going to be a handful of us. But if you are thinking of coming, please do RSVP so I know the numbers. But other than that, yes, have a good week, everyone listening. And for those of you in the chat, I'm going to talk to you now. All right. Do I even need the video going for this? Oh, good. You're studying the fundamentals tomorrow. And oh, yeah. And the plan so far is to have one of the weeks uploaded every kind of like Sunday for most people, which will be my Monday. So in each of the directions and the fundamentals, you get like 3 weeks worth, and that'll be every Sunday. So it'll be this one. All right, cool. What is the foundations? It is the premium member course that's running for the next, I guess, about 4 months. But it's foundational magical theory and practice. Yeah, and I'm loving it. Yeah. Ask for things that you shouldn't. So that's a growing experience, but also that's a different kind of complex morality, you know, because maybe the things that you shouldn't be asking for, this is a stretch, go with me on it. Maybe the things you shouldn't be asking for are, you know, ultimately ultimate goods. And this, I mean, Alberto Villoldo writes about this in, I forget which book, but some of his early Quero teachers believe that even the Spanish invasion of Peru will be for an ultimate good, even though it destroyed Incan civilization. It will ultimately be for good, and it doesn't mean they approve of it. This kind of comes back to that sort of Iluvatar Melkor thing. So again, maybe the things you're asking for, you should know better, but it's a dangerous moral question, right? Like I should ask for things that I shouldn't. What do you mean by shouldn't? Is there self-work on what you feel you deserve? Is there desire work that needs to happen there? And that's something that I'm obviously very interested in. Could I talk about that? No, it's just I felt like the video is being a bit more personal. That's it. Cool. So if Khidr had knowledge of the future, that makes him like, well, so that I think that's an answer from someone who hasn't read much science fiction, because knowledge of the future and intervening to have other things happen differently means other things, you get caught in that time loop. So I'm sure that again, that's one level of it, but it works better as far as I can tell in a more science fiction, valet, hyperdimensional sense. What do you think about studying with guardian angel magic during these times? Generally speaking, I'm pro angel at the best of times. When it comes to guardian angel, that is an incomplete metaphysics. Do you know what I mean? So you don't just have one And so depending on where, for instance, you can cast like an angel, almost like natal chart, because there are angels governing planets and signs and so on, so that you'll have this whole team of celestial angels in kind of combination that's unique to you. That would be, I mean, is that guardian angel? Or are you talking about, that's one thing from a magical perspective. You can go down the Catholic guardian angel prayer route, and if you vibe with that, go for it. But rather than, it's not a universal category. But the short answer is yes. Being on good terms with your spirit team is always good. How would I relate Khidr to sigils? I don't know if I would. I wonder if there's any way to answer that question. No, I think if you get more clarification on that, I'm just trying to work out if you mean using sigils to adjust the future. Well, because sigils kind of, however you want to say this, always do that. Like if they're adjusting future trajectories. Yeah, probably a lot of desire what to do. Well, that's what the wealth magic course. There will actually be more of it in the foundations, but I think a lot of people, it's certainly something that comes up with the shamanic healing work. A lot of people in the West have very fraught relationships to their desire, and that's, I mean, this is a hokey thing to say, but it's not wrong. And capitalism, et cetera, being a big part of that, but not just capitalism, but capitalism in a post-Christian sense it's a mess, right? Yeah. I would not bother reactivating an old robofish. It would just, I don't see the point. Sigils are free. Make a new one. And it would just, it wouldn't be clean. I wouldn't do that. Yeah. What do you think about the connection between AI and the angels? Well, that's a good one. I might actually do an AI show. The bootloader idea isn't necessarily wrong. I just don't think it's arrived yet. I think, well, it has. I don't think it arrives in a science fiction sense where all of a sudden we have this intelligence where like a archonic intelligence inhabits a particular AI, like a Skynet, and runs the world. I don't think it's that exactly. I think this technocratic impulse that to some extent has always been there, it's just gotten worse over the last few centuries, is this being. And it's kind of like, if you remember StarCraft, it's like creep. So it's changing the conditions of reality to allow it to experience more of our reality. So it's like a slow motion invasion. So the intelligence, it's not going to be a singular AI intelligence that becomes like the demon. In that sense, it's already here, that kind of archonic need to control and know what everyone should do, that Sauron impulse to run things perfectly because you know how to do it, which is managerialism, technocracy, communism, whatever. It's that same entity, and that's here that's here everywhere that's present, if that makes sense. And it's kind of like creep changing and so consequently, if you can call that an angel, Lucifer can be associated with that kind of stuff. I refuse to give Lucifer back to technocracy. It's why I use the word archon instead. But the angelic would not necessarily be, well, wouldn't be that, right? The angelic is, if you think about what choirs are and all this boring singing that, endless choirs arrayed about God singing, what's actually being described there is resonance and harmony, and so balance even, right? So it's that sort of living waveform movement or pulse or heartbeat of the cosmos. It's just creatively described as choirs and whatever. So that rhythm of change and heartbeat stands opposed to the fixity of an ordered technocratic creation. Yeah. So yeah, I found AI to be very disappointing when it comes to magical stuff. Like, I just finished an article for New Dawn magazine on Pluto and Aquarius, and just on a whim to see if I could prove the point, I used ChatGPT to give me some Pluto and Aquarius stuff, and it was mostly and some of it was wrong, because I asked it, when did Pluto enter Capricorn, which is 2008, and like it was wrong. I forget what year. It's like 1997. It's yeah. So, and funny enough, I've been thinking about that because I've occasionally tried to use it for fortune telling, not to use it for fortune telling, but I'll be in a session or whatever. I wonder if ChatGPT's got this right, and it's completely wrong. And it's wrong because it will pick things. It's essentially just a search engine that is giving the information back to you in a format that makes it look like you're talking to another being. So it's what it does is finds like a page or find somewhere on the internet where that information is. But particularly if it's fortune telling results, there'll be something like a list of playing card meanings, and it'll pick from the wrong area. So it'll give you not just the wrong answer. You might be asking for like 3 of clubs, and it'll give you 5 of hearts. And so it's wrong, but it's basically a poor search result. I find that fascinating that it doesn't work well with magic. What it works really well with is archonic, technocratic stuff, like getting it to give you some sort of simple open source code for websites. It's great for that, but it's not good at what I would consider to be the real, which is the spirit. Like it's when it's at its worst. Like it'll get some things wrong in the code section, whatever, because we've actually tried to use that on the website to be like, okay, well, this is boring, but I want to be able to work out how to integrate this thing into here. Give me some code for that. And some of it is actually just, sometimes it works, but some of it's just wrong. What I will say is that this is, as Jeff Bezos said 20 years ago, it's day one for the internet. This is day one for what we're calling AI, and it will certainly get better. You've only got to think about how good ChatGPT will be. Yeah, I'm going to do an AI episode. All right, next solo show will be about AI. That's a good question. Geomancy requires heart-centered interpretation to get right. Exactly, and I literally think that's it, because if you've done the New Year's group journey, if you're a premium member, or if you've started on the foundations, that heart math process of, we actually know on a materialist basis that so-called thinking, the heart has neural cells, and not just that, but they are in activity before the brain cells. So kind of like quote unquote proper thinking begins in the heart and then ends in the head. And that's sort of neither here nor there, except to open up the conversation that I agree absolutely in the chat that something like geomancy requires heart thinking, not head thinking. And AI will never do heart thinking, because I think everything requires, that's almost like the point of this episode. I think everything requires heart thinking. And that will always be our difference. If you try to compete with it at the level of the head, it'll win every time. It'll win every time now, right? That's whatever we call AI. You can't outcompute a computer, but it can never outhuman a human. And so the heart-centered thinking, the intelligence of the heart, as Shwala Dlubich called it, is what we should be doing anyway. So magic can potentially bust up and confuse AI, sort of. AI cannot touch it. Like it literally cannot grasp it with its hands. It is a manifestation. This comes back to that archon technocracy thing. It's a manifestation of that same enlightenment thinking that just declared magic doesn't exist because it doesn't understand it. And it's the same. It will never be able to grasp it because it doesn't think it exists. It can't. It's looking for the shells, the material excreta of something that it can't actually hold. Really fascinating. So retreat into magic. Yeah, I like that. That's a David Icke thing to some extent that James wrote. Archons can only copy, not create. Archons, yes, the demiurge. It's interesting. It depends on how you define creation. I think in some of the Gnostic texts they can, but I really like using that as a distinction between archons and something else, because you when you step into that, true or not, archons can only copy, not create. A lot of the last few decades, well, few centuries, but especially the last few decades make sense. For instance, the Hollywood's complete inability to create anything new that doesn't already exist, the endless reboots and so on, is just archonic. It's coming from the technocratic business optimization archonic brain, and they're like, okay, well, let's improve that so we make more money. But it should be film, or any kind of artistic expression should be heart first, and it's a really useful indicator of, like, am I with something archonic here, or am I with something? And it doesn't mean that reboots can't be creative. Again, Lord of the Rings, and Tolkien kind of said this. He didn't say it was a reboot of the Silmarillion, but he said the stuff that's playing out in the Lord of the Rings is like intentionally an echo of, you know, the sort of mythic that happens in Silmarillion. That's not a reboot, it's a resonance. And that's kind of the difference, I think. But it's a good point. All right. Used to work on semantic shirts 10 years ago and we ran into the same kind of problems. So I didn't work on semantic shirts, but if you go back, I was in digital media 10 years ago, and I'm trying to optimize for users, which is, you know, humans, but trying to optimize for users and realizing that, so we were essentially trying to customize around human personalities on some of the websites that I was working on. And it was just really clunky, childish. Yeah, so I might do, that might be two separate ones. I think I will do an AI one. I might do maybe I'll have a transhumanist guest. Maybe I'll do it that way. But I do have some takes on AI that I will, I'm going to add that. Algorithms recycling successful franchises, but they're like, they get less successful with each reboot. It's really interesting. It's like a photocopier, because it is. You know what I mean? There's just very little energy left in it. We haven't obviously watched all the Marvel movies, but whenever we catch one, we're like, now have we seen them all? We turn into, you know, boomers in the cinema. Like, who is he? He was the one who did that thing in the other one where there was the necklace. It's like, oh, fuck. And it's a demented mess now. I have. Yes, I have. I've interviewed. I've interviewed Freedom Cole, and that was a good interview, actually. Geomancy can be very addictive. It's this. When we do, we'll probably get to. There will one day be a member course on like oracle reading, and that'll include oracle cards. It'll be mostly oracle cards. But I have this thought, and I maybe it'll fit in the foundations, maybe it won't. It's just this thought in my head that I think everyone should have. I think everyone who does magic should have some knowledge of astrology, if just for electing. And if you vibe on it, obviously that is an infinite field of study that extends many lifetimes. And so that's one thing that I would say is an essential. I think being good at tarot or being competent at tarot is another essential. And then I think you should have one other, and we could say cards, like obviously I've been mostly doing the Norman the last couple of years, and I'm very good at it now, it has to be said. I'm so excited for these cards to go out, my Fortune's Fool's deck, which there are still some left. If you haven't bought one, you should, because it will be, that's them and then they're gone, and it's got my whole fortune telling book in it. But I think you should have a card deck that will give you really good answers, because you need that. And then I think you should have another oracle. This is coming back to geomancy, that you can study and use, that isn't necessarily cards, although it can be. So like I Ching or geomancy, I think you should have something else to talk to. So, and that could, this is why I mentioned astrology at the beginning. That could be astrology, but I don't want people to, there's a weird way of saying it. If you, let's say you're good at cards and then you say, okay, cool, I'm vibing more with geomancy or I Ching, I won't bother with astrology. I don't want people to do that, because you do need a basic magical timing system. Now, as for using astrology then as your sort of oracular prediction, that's up to you. But I think people should have like a practice of geomancy or I Ching. And those two in particular, because much like astrology, it is sort of the work of lifetimes. You know, you'll never be, certainly, I mean, I don't know how many people of Chinese descent are listening to this or watching it, but you'll never, a humble thing to say is that, because I use I Ching, not often, but I do. That's my kind of, rather, I like geomancy, but particularly because of the shamanic healing training, where towards the end, Alberto describes the I Ching as an oracle from the plant kingdom, which is what I use it for. And, you know, it was yarrow sticks, so that tracks. Anyway, I would never and will never, because I never will be an I Ching expert, but you want a system where you can kind of say, because I haven't studied at the feet of a master for 25 years, I am a humble rank beginner. And you want an oracle that you can be humble before, I think is the way to say it. And I don't really think you can be humble before tarot, not the way I do it. I don't mean I know everything about tarot. I mean that tarot works better, I think, in the hands and minds of like a fortune teller. So in the tarot course, in the premium members area, that's what we begin with. It's like, find that inner fortune telling archetype and let him, her express through you. Like Cher in the Dark Lady film clip, like find that. And there's a caprice to cartomancy, like a trickster element to it that doesn't mesh with humility. It doesn't mean you know better than it, but the engagement is more capricious. And whereas I wouldn't do that with the I Ching. You want to be humble before something that's been, you know, an oracle from the plant kingdom that's 4,000 years old, maybe. You know, that requires a bit of humility. And consequently, that's what I mean by I think you should have something else to go to, because sometimes you want an oracular moment that does come from humility rather than the kind of trickster magician fortune telling. And geomancy can do that, and I Ching can do that. Yeah. Animated Mid-Journey movies on the way. It is going to be interesting. And it's funny, they're going to be crap, right? Obviously, to start with. That uncanny valley factor will be in effect. We'll see. Yeah. How does it feel to send the Fortunes full print? Well, so funny enough, the deck isn't off to print yet because Colin still hasn't finished the last couple of cards, but the book is done and James is working on the packaging. So once Colin, like, we know the layout's complete, the size of the box, the layout of the box, Colin has to do the cover of the book and finish the last few cards. But essentially it's out of my hands now, which is the most important. I actually finished my contribution to it on December 31, and it's been production all this month. And so Colin thought he would be done now by the end of January, but it still needs another week or so, and then it'll be off. But yes, it feels very good. It feels very good indeed. I was going to do this week a solo show on what it feels like to finish a fortune-telling book. And then I kind of wanted to do this one instead. So that one is coming up. Probably when it's gone, and I think part of that was, let's not jinx it, you know, let's just wait for it to officially be at the printers in the next couple of weeks. Then I'll do the episode. And if it happens before the AI one, fine. Otherwise, it'll be the AI one and that. But I do promise, because the short story is, when you create, and I was told this beforehand, when you create a fortune-telling deck, you end up inside it and the universe goes Philip K. Dick crazy. And some of those events are actually in the book, but you're just, yeah, you're visiting a cardiologist the morning after or the morning after you finish the show on like the heart card, it's like, what is happening? How does reality work? And this is that humility before the mystery stuff. It's almost back to Moses and Khidr, right? How does this work? What's going on? It's amazing. So the point is there's a whole solo show of misadventures of having written a fortune telling book. You know, I can't find a decent tarot app. When I had one, it had a reference to pinch. I don't care for that. I don't think you'll ever find a decent tarot app, because I don't think this is a good example of the archonic or the technological not being able to cope with the mystery. The best tarot app that's ever been invented is tarot cards. That would be, and there's kind of like no such thing as the basics. The basics are read the pictures on the cards. Yeah. Add some drama to the divination. Yeah. I Ching article isn't to be revered, but respected. Yeah. So I didn't say revered. I said be humble before it. Any I Ching book recommendations? Yeah, actually, I might actually put some of that together. That's not a bad question, because I do have a few that have been good. Change. Yeah, good for you. Yeah. The Richard Wilhelm is the kind of classic. That's the classic translation. That's sort of the one that's the Waite Smith of tarot of I Ching translations. All right. Well, can't let go of my Thoth tarot deck, then don't. I mean, I'm definitely, and always, not that I don't have a bunch of, I'll show you some of them. Not that I don't love theme decks. This one was really fun. I played with that. Was that last year? Yes, I got this. I gave this to myself Christmas before last, and this is like an Art Deco, a Chiro Marchetti one, but like sort of an Art Deco. Do I want to say Marseille-ish? Not really, but it is kind of like that. And Lucy Delix has actually been on the show. I wonder how she is in Peru with the things going on in Peru. Not that I don't love Waite Smith-inspired theme decks, which is weird because I don't really resonate with the Waite Smith, but I will always be Team Marseille. And everyone who says, "Oh, I can't read it because it's got no pictures," like, do you understand how radio works? Like, do you look for the sound in the room when the radio is on? Oh, got no pictures on it. For God's sake. There's no pictures in the I Ching either. When people say that, first of all, it does have pictures on the pip cards. There's swords or what have you. But that, when I hear that, I'm like, you have not done this right. And we sort of take a torch to that in the tarot course in the premium members area, obviously. But every time I hear that, I'm like, you're literally not doing tarot right, because you think it's a game of memory where you like memorize a picture and like look it up in a book, and that's what it means. That's not how it works. Oh, that's cool. Marcus Aurelius meditation. So I'm in a bit of a stoic phase myself, to be honest. Yeah, I'm glad you got hooked up. This is I'm glad I like, yes. If I have to bully people into Marseille, I will, but I'm glad you got hooked on it. I know what you mean. I struggle to read something else unless it is for fun. And I don't mean like frivolous fun, although I do have somewhere here. I don't know where my Golden Girls tarot is. Yes, I do. This one is for fun. I wouldn't be necessarily. I like that it's like a cigarette pack popped up. This one is for fun. I wouldn't necessarily. Page of Cups. Yeah. This is six. So good. Six of Swords. Be Arthur in a canoe with weapons. Um, anyway, so tarot. I don't mean that tarot should be serious. Tarot can be fun, but for me, there's only Marseille and the Golden Girls. Yeah, that's kind of how I get my fun from the tarot. Yeah. We actually rewatched the show from beginning to end. Didn't do Golden Palace, obviously. We don't hate ourselves in 2021. Yeah, Golden Ghost Tower. It's fun. It's cute. Like they're on the Lanaian parts of it. Um, let me find a Trump. So this is the Hierophant. So whoever put this together is obviously knows their, maybe there'll be a name here. Obviously knows their tarot, but I plainly knows the Golden Girls. Um, yeah, no name on it. You can get it on Amazon. It's not like I bought it in some, yeah, somewhere. Oh my God. I have to show you that. The Chariot. I mean, even the haircuts, even the kind of mullets on them, just, yeah, perfect. I'll look into your future from the lanai. There you go. Anyway, yeah, so it can be fun, but to me, and I've spoken to professional tarot readers about this. My neighbor Avalon has her own deck, so that's a little bit different, where she obviously reads with that. But if someone isn't reading for me with Marseille, I'm like, and that's kind of the rules for professionals is you end up using Waite Smith or Marseille, and I would like to see more people using Marseille. What do I think of the Hodorowski book Way of the Tarot? I love it. I think he's amazing. He is amazing, but yeah, I love it. I think it's really good. The Tarot the Open Reading and anything by Camellia Elias, obviously my favorites. But particularly if you are like moving into Marseille, Tarot the Open Reading, or just do the tarot course. Yeah. Yeah. This is good. I wonder if we got anything else to share. I need a better deck organization system. I have medium rotation ones here and low rotation ones in the spirit room. Uh, but this is one of those Los Scarabeo kind of, reprints of old timey ones, the mini Chiate. These are odd because, and I write about this in the course, video about this in the course, I suppose, they need to be sort of jailbroken away from their fixed meanings, but they can actually be really useful consequently. So they've got kind of what in French, obviously, but what they could be, like obviously discretion. It's really interesting to incorporate fixed meanings from a time of card counting, that literally, oh, turn over one card, you get a Seven of Cups, count down the deck, seven cards, see what card that is. Like it was more like a maths game than card reading during the era of Atea. And it's fun trying to move them into a more living fortune telling. I wouldn't begin there, but it's fun moving it into a more living fortune telling context. Yeah, Tarot didn't begin as a D&D like card game. It started off with playing cards and then became a gift. But it was the game was basically trumps. It was almost like Snap. You would have to. It's boring to be honest. Yeah. All right, I've made a complete mess of my cards, which is a pity. But anyway, I might. This was good. This is. I think we might start doing more of this because the presentation stuff, the solo shows only go for about 40 minutes. Some of them will go longer, but that's good. That's about the length of time I want for these things. Holy Diamond, I like it. I mentioned that in the Angels course somewhere recently. I think I was not expecting. No, it depends. If you want to do like HGA Angel Magic, you can do it. In that sense, I like it. So I didn't mention that one in the Angels course. I mentioned his other one. This. Oh yeah, it's cold here. This is my my Basquiat sweater. So Black Abbot White Magic, I liked better because I actually learned things about Trithemius that I didn't know before. And it's a book that will open up, and there is some sort of practical in it, but it really opens up existing angel magic. So if you kind of know, which I generally speaking, when it comes to grimoires, I'm team angel rather than team demon. Now I definitely went through a demonic phase, so I got a lot out of this book. I learned things that I'm like, wow, and it's those things you learn. They're like, that's so fucking obvious. Anyway, well done to him for doing it. Thanks for showing us your cards. Who is your favorite angel? David Boreanaz. Why not? Good question, though. Raphael and Michael appear most in healing sessions. So I guess I'd have to, for professional reasons, I have to say one of them. Good question. Um, yeah, I don't know if I have one. I'm going to think on that. That's um, that's a crazier question than it seems. That's pretty good. All right. Do you have During Virtue Tarot? They must be collector's items. I don't have tarot, but I have, and you'll actually, if you're, there's a spirit room tour coming up this weekend in the foundations course. I have a bunch of her decks, and I want to do a video or an article about her, uh, something like During Virtue, I'm sorry you lost your mind, or something, maybe not as weird as that, but I definitely have a bunch of her like Angel and Healing with the Fairies decks and so on. Because I was in her first graduating class of certified Angel Intuitives as an ultimate '90s move. So, but the short story is, obviously she had this Christian conversion and moved to Hawaii with all her money and disavowed the decks because she decided they were demonic. And it's weird because what she actually says, this is why I want to do a video on it, is people who use these cards have tragedies, like bad stuff happens to them. And it's like, that's not necessarily wrong. Is in if you tangle with magic in a frivolous or even unprotected way, that can happen. It's funny. So everyone's like, ha ha ha, she's crazy. She thinks demons come after people who use her cards. I'm like, yeah, but that's her explanation for something that isn't completely wrong. The rest of it, I mean, I'm sure she keeps the money, and I am happy that she's found a spirituality that she vibes with, and I'm happy she's loving her Baptist Christian life in Hawaii. But when she said that, I'm like, let's say I think it's a wrong description. It's like a misdiagnosis of a true thing. It's really interesting. That's why I want to do a video on it. Yeah. So any plans to do live on Odyssey 2? They do upload to Odyssey. So I'm waiting for a platform, and it's not StreamYard, unfortunately, but I'm waiting for a platform that will allow me, because I'm paying to go live on Rumble, and I've only ever done it once. So I'm waiting for a reliable platform that will allow me to live stream on all three, is how I'm going to do it. Yeah. I know 10K isn't, yeah, 10K isn't a lot. And if someone died, would you do it? 44% said yes. It's, so, I mean, that kind of works for this episode. You know, in your heart, that's not right. You know, at the level of morality, that's not right. Yeah. God, I love having this standing desk because it means you don't have to like, especially as we have, where is it? There's gay little posture chairs, right? Which I swear by when I am actually sitting, they're really good. But now that I've got a standing desk, which I'll show you, I've shown premium members this, but like, uh, there's like it's an automated standing desk, and you sort of slide it up and down. But it does mean that I can just like walk around and get stuff. It's really useful. Yeah, so I've looked at split stream. There still isn't one that doesn't lead to lag on all three that's sort of available at a commercial basis. And then you end up with like, it's frustrating, put it that way. We'll get there. But I would, yeah. Yes, I would love to be able to give people the non-YouTube option, but yeah, I'm actually going to spend more time on YouTube this year. This is because I actually am not sure if TikTok's even going to survive the next year and a half in terms of being banned in Western countries or not, which was sort of obvious from the beginning. But as we get closer to that 2025 war with China, it does seem odd to keep a surveillance and mind control device owned by a hostile foreign government on Western phones. So I'm like, okay, well, if people are leaving Google, and as in from a search engine perspective, which they are, second biggest search engine is YouTube and so on. There's like and if I literally don't think TikTok is a place to, not that I would do it, but like if you're looking for digital strategy, there's significant risk in TikTok even existing in 18 months time, or as in being available. It'll exist in China, right? So it's like, I don't know. I don't even think they'd let them spin it off. I don't even think they'd be able to, which is what apparently Trump tried to do, was to get it owned by Americans. I'm not even sure if it'll be that. So yeah. I also want to do more video, which is one of the other reasons for the change in the course. Like blogging, I love blogging, but I also really like video. I did a film degree. So creatively, I think I'm going to end up, I said this in a solo show before Christmas, that I just want to do more. This, speaking of Oracle cards, it'd probably be a bit more organized than just showing you whatever's around me in the office. But I want to do videos on Oracle cards or the Necronomicon or like whatever, just random stuff that maybe isn't a whole show, but I just want to, like what I would have done blog posts before on, is that. Anyway, yeah, I wouldn't miss TikTok for a moment. Yeah, I don't keep it on the phone. I doubt very much Doreen Virtue would come on a magic show as a guest. Tell you what. I don't know much about the NDE community on YouTube. That's standing desk changed my life. Yeah, me too. I've only had it for about a month, but I love it. I think it's really good. I hope everyone. I used to think they were a monstrous idea in offices, in the couple of offices that actually instituted them, but they're amazing. They're really good. You change how you think as well. It's really, yay for them. All right, guys. Well, yeah, the after show was fun. Good show and tell. Good questions. But I think we might draw this to an end and then get the other one up, get the audio version up for the people who didn't join us. But have a good, was Friday morning here? Yes. Have a good weekend coming up. And for premium members, On Sunday, you will have the beginnings of the next section of the foundations. So enjoy, and yeah, see you in the next one.